Hey everyone, Cynics here, and today happens to be a very special day because it is once again Self-Portrait Day. So if you're new to the channel, you might not know, but November 1st happens to be Self-Portrait Day. So make sure you take some time today and draw a little picture of yourself. Anyway, I do a video for this every year, so I like to have a little theme each year to mix it up, just something that encapsulates the year for me. And I think for this year, there's been a lot of stuff that's happened, but I'm gonna focus on YouTube. And something that I see a lot of on YouTube is art challenges and silly memes like that. So this time, I'm gonna try the meme and do the 10 style challenge on myself. And that just means I'm gonna try to draw myself in 10 different styles. So let's just dive right into it. I think the proper way to start this out is by drawing a self-portrait in my own style, and I wasn't really sure what my style is because I like to experiment a lot, but then again, people seem to identify my style and recognize it in other people, so I think it's just a matter of making lines that are very angular and kind of ugly, trying to focus on the forms and planes of the face and just exaggerating them just a little bit to be kind of more dynamic, but not in a necessarily pleasing way. I don't know how to describe it. It's very comforting to draw, but it doesn't necessarily look good by beauty standards. So I'm making people ugly, but I'm doing it in a way where the lines are kind of pretty. Hopefully that's the best way to describe it. So I'll try to make a long, narrow face, kind of a small jaw, make sure the nose is relatively large and the mouth's kind of silly looking, maybe have the front teeth showing just a little bit, and of course get some bags and wrinkles around the eyes, and that feels pretty good. So I like the way that's going, and I'm just gonna move right into colors. Now if you've never seen me paint before, the first thing I like to do is color the line work, and that will just make sure it's prettier and blends nicer once I get into the farther stages. So a nice dark reddish tone is always a good color for the line work if you're drawing a portrait. After that, it's just a matter of putting in some base colors underneath the line work, and then once I'm happy with those, I can start painting above the line work and get rid of some of the lines. I'm not going to go overboard and spend a lot of time rendering each one of these because I got a lot to do. I got 10 paintings to do, so they're going to be a little sloppy and a little messy. But as you can see, my painting style is mainly just a focus on having a nice balance of hard edges and soft edges. Other than that, I like to really focus on fundamental type stuff, so color zones of the face, getting some really red tones in the middle, some grayer, bluer tones in the bottom, and maybe some yellowish tones up top. And if you do all that stuff, it's kind of fun to experiment and go a little bit crazy in parts. One other silly thing I'm going to try to throw in these self-portraits is just a little bit of a horrible stubbly beard hairs growing randomly. That makes it a little more accurate. Anyway, I got this floofy hair up top and nothing too crazy going on, but I think that's gonna do it for my own personal style, and I'll be cleaning things up a little off camera just to give myself some fresh eyes and making it more presentable, but here you can see the finished result. So I like this dumb little expression. It feels like a reasonable self-portrait. I can definitely tell it's me with the goofy little teeth and everything. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. It's time to get into the silly stuff, so I'm going to draw myself as a Rick and Morty character. I know that's very popular. That seems to be a staple in all the style memes. The scariest thing to me about this style is that you need to keep your lines at a very consistent width, which is very hard if you're not used to doing it. But for the sake of drawing cartoony style stuff, I will do my best. Of course, I know there's no way I'm going to be able to draw a perfect circle with even line weights, so I'm just going to use some circle templates for that. It's a little bit of cheating, but I don't care. Alright, anyway, one thing I'm going to try to make sure I do for each of these self-portraits is give them a little bit of expression. I never like it when people do all the different styles, but they always have this neutral expression on all of them. You gotta embrace the styles and try to get some fun expressions in there. So I'll give myself this typical Rick and Morty mouth, that's good enough. I think that's a good expression. It feels accurate. I feel like that's an expression I would make. One thing I like to focus on when emulating a style is trying to see if they use curve shapes or angle shapes more, especially for things like the hair. You can always tell styles by the hair. And for Rick and Morty, they do use some angles in hair, but generally I feel like they like to go for these more bubbly, rounded shapes. The pupils in the eyes are of course those weird little wobbly shapes, so make sure you don't make them perfect circles or anything like that. And for the coloring, I'm just going to keep everything flat. I don't think they ever really use shadows unless it's extremely dramatic or important. So mostly just flat colors. I'll throw in a little highlight on the hair because they sometimes do that. I've seen it before. So I think that's going to do it for my Rick and Morty Cynics. I'll just throw it on a background and bam, we're done. I think that came out pretty good. It definitely looks like someone that would debase themselves in a McDonald's parking lot for packets of flavored corn syrup. Alright, moving along, let's try some Adventure Time art. This is another staple of style challenges, possibly the biggest staple of style challenges. So we're going to draw ourselves in a very simplified cartoony way. Once again, really focusing on trying to keep our lines nice and smooth and consistent in width, which is so difficult for me. It would probably be easier if I did a rough draft first and then really focused on just making nice clean lines, but I just can't force myself to do that. I love direct drawing too much. I think in the end, I'm looking a bit like a little baby in this one, but that's fine. It doesn't have to be a perfect likeness. It's like little toddler cynics. Anyway, he's looking pretty worried about his young looks, so that kind of gives it a fun expression. For Adventure Time limbs, you gotta give them this rubber hose style look, and that makes it pretty fun to draw actually. As I mentioned earlier, hair is an important style determiner. We're just gonna keep it nice and chunky, a little bit wild, kind of makes it more childish. For the colors, once again, just flat colors, no shading, no highlights. Keep it nice and simple and flat. Try to pick good colors as well. And I'll add in a few freckles here and there because that just makes it extra cute. Okay, I think that's probably the easiest one to color out of all of them, and we're done. So bacon pancakes for breakfast. Let's move on to the next one. Now, if you've watched my sketchbook tour videos, you might know that I had a big thing for Invader Zim back in the day. So it's time to draw some Invader Zim style art. And this is quite a nostalgic feeling for me, but I haven't done it for probably 10, 15 years. I don't even know how long. How old am I? Well, whatever. It's still a very fun style to draw. You get to go really crazy with angular shapes and try to be as expressive as you can and just emphasize all the things that make people a little creepy. Come to think of it, maybe that's why my current style is the way it is. Anyway, I think I'll go for a slightly annoyed look. Of course, everyone in this style looks a little bit crazed, so that's good. Things to know about this style, I feel like every line kind of flows out from the neck, where the neck is like this pinched tiny point and every other line's just kind of flowing out from there. You got these big egg-shaped eyes and the pupils are usually little boxes, so don't make round pupils again, make little boxes. Anyway, you can have a little line width in parts, such as the ears, but for the most part, it's still the same solid line thing. I'm going to throw in a little hand just to make sure we're not being lazy with our styles and expressions. That's the only way we can become the true master of the style challenge. All other style challenges be warned. Alright, so for our colors this time, we actually get to use some shadows. So we'll have one shadow tone, kind of a cel-shaded style, except way more angular and pointy and kind of gross. And it's very important that we make sure the color of the shadow is appropriate to the style. So for this one, I feel like they often use a darker tone of the same hue. There's not much hue shifting going on, which makes things look a little bit more sickly. And normally that's a bad thing, but for this style, it kind of works in its favor. The eyes do have a bit of a blue shadow, but everything else just sticks to a monochromatic shadow. Alright, I think that's gonna do it for my Invader Zim Cynics, and it was a nice walk down memory lane. Now we've done 3 Western cartoons so far, and I think it's time we travel to the East and start exploring some anime styles. First up, let's aim for something cute and try to do some Little Witch Academia style art. In some ways, this is a nice transition from the Western style art because a lot of the shapes are very rounded and maybe slightly influenced by Pixar and Disney and all that stuff. I'm going to try to go super rounded with every shape I make, and of course, since we're going into anime, the eyes have to be pretty substantial and interesting, and we can even incorporate a little bit of line weight on the facial features, so that should be a little bit nicer. Drawing anime eyes is actually hugely difficult for me. I'm so used to incorporating planes into all of my drawings of faces and eye sockets that it's really hard to make something that's just like a flat sticker on top of a form. It definitely shouldn't be as difficult as it is for me. Anyway, I think I had the most fun with the hair just because it has this nice poofiness to it. I love the way they make the hair nice and big and rounded, and it's so cute. And I don't know how to make this one look that much like myself though. I can try to make the mouth a little bit silly, but other than that, it's kind of hard to get a good likeness. Moving on to color, in the world of anime, skin tones tend to be very high chroma, super bright and light. And once we do those base tones, we can start incorporating some colored shadow tones. So for this one, we're going to go with a slightly cool, kind of purpley looking tone, and that should give us the look we're going for. I'll throw in some shadows under the eye, hopefully that can help us look a little bit more like ourselves, and some minor touches here and there. Overall, still not the best likeness, but at least it's a cute drawing and it captures the style. For the finished image, I added some little bits of glowy magic stuff in the background, like little fairy dust things. Who knows what they are? Next up, since we've done our cutesy anime, it's time to dive into a little bit of shonen anime. So this one is going to be in the style of One Piece. Alright, so once again, we're still keeping our lines very clean and simple, still drawing incredibly iconically, and we can try to incorporate a little bit of fun stuff. I'll make myself a nice little pirate here. One Piece is kind of interesting because the male eyes are often just little tiny black pupils, whereas the female characters actually have the full-on anime big iris pupil stuff going on. Luckily, this diversity lets me be a little more creative with the eyes and make them a lot easier for me to draw. Unlike all the previous styles we've done, with this One Piece style, the hair is often a bunch of little tiny strands and tufts of hair. So we can get into a lot of little shapes and try to make them flow, but just kind of go overboard with the amount of lines and things we're doing. I tried to keep the expression pretty stern and grumpy so we actually feel like we're a pirate, and I think it worked out pretty well. For the coloring, once again, the skin tones are very high chroma, but we're going to have some shadows this time, and they're going to be a nice reddish tone. So that reddish tone will make it look nice and lively. You'll feel like he's out and about, plundering the high seas, and we can actually throw in some highlights on this one. We're going to use white for the highlights though, which is a little weird, but they tend to do that a lot in this style. The highlights in the hair are also pretty notable because we're going to use a lot of thin lines. So each highlight will just be a thin line, we'll spread them out wherever it looks good. I even got to give myself my little scar above the left eye, so that works out nicely. Alright, let's wrap this one up. I even threw myself on a little wanted poster to complete the effect. This one turned out pretty good. I think it's time we move on to a much more challenging anime style. So for this one, we're going to be trying to paint like Tsukimi Chan. So I'm definitely going to have a lot of fun with this one. And by the way, Tsukimi Chan is a wonderful person. The few times I've met her, she's always been wonderful to be around. I think for this one, I'm actually going to have to really focus on the pose. It needs to have that sexy pinup pose. So I'm going to make sure I put one arm up, maybe a hand behind the head. That seems like a typical Tsukimi-chan type pose. And of course, we'll just try to make it look extra sexy. So it might not turn out to be the best likeness. Or maybe it will. It won't. It really won't. Anyway, I feel like this is the only one where I really can't do a good direct drawing. It would take way too much effort to try to capture her style in a direct drawing, so I am going to try to make a quick rough draft first and keep cleaning it up, because those lines she uses are very tiny and very clean, and I don't know if I could do it in a direct drawing. So I'll just make this rough draft here and keep improving it slowly, keep fixing the line works, keep just shuffling things around. I feel like that's actually an important part of Tsukimi-chan's workflow too, is to just be comfortable with putting something down and then liquefying it around or just moving it around until you get it where you like it. The eyes are definitely a little bit tricky for me. Once again, that slight anime style just kills me. I can't do good eyes in anime style. I don't know why. It's like a mental block. I'll just keep adjusting it until it looks reasonable. I went a little bit wild on the hair this time. I wish I could have incorporated some stronger shapes, but I just wasn't sure how to work it in and still capture that style. Oh well, I'm gonna have to zoom ahead in this video a lot because I think I spent more time on this painting than any of the other ones. I spent like a few hours on this one, so let's just skip through the drawing part. let's skip to the painting. It's a lot of very soft blending and airbrushing techniques, which means it's really hard to speed through it without taking a little bit of time. I'm definitely not going to make this as nice as I could because there's no way I'd make my deadline by then. But I'll try to make certain parts nice, so I'll focus in on the eyes and nose and mouth because that's where people's attention always goes. So if you can get those few parts to look good, then everything else will just look good by association. Anyway, after much airbrushing and much subtle value and hue shifting, it reasonably looks like Tsukimi Chan style. I'm going to make sure I have a nice strong highlight on one side and a little bit of a secondary bounce light on the other side as well. I have to say, they're all pretty weird, but this one might be the most awkward self-portrait I've ever done. Anyway, I just went really fast through the hair, putting a bunch of tiny little strokes, which is not how I would recommend painting hair, by the way. It's always good to block it up into chunkier shapes, but for the purposes of trying to capture her more rendered style, I thought I could fake it by just making little tiny lines everywhere. It doesn't work that great, but I guess it works enough. Let's just take a look at the finished result. So you can see here I added a little bit of magical glowy backgrounds. That's only fitting. Little bits of sparkles and twinkles everywhere. It feels like a reasonable Tsukimi Chan clone. I think I'm ready to go post this on DeviantArt. Just be sure to subscribe to my Patreon if you want to see the not safe for work version. No, I'm just kidding. There's no not safe for work version. Okay, let's move along. I've tried some Western cartoons, I've tried some anime. Now I think it's time to experiment around with emulating some famous artist styles. First up, one artist that was very influential on my artwork, and I think he has a pretty unique style, and that is Ashley Wood. I finally get to start using some line weight again. So in Ashley Wood's style, and by the way, I'm going to represent his sketching style, not his painting style, just because I'm lazy and that would take too long to once again paint some finished thing. But his line style is very defined by his crazy use of extremely thick lines and extremely thin lines. The line weight's just all over the place. It's like big chunks next to little lines next to big chunks, and it just keeps going back and forth, and it's very graphical. Of course, I love graphical things, so I'm just going to experiment around with these lines as much as I can. Just trying stuff, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work. It's a lot of Control-Z and just seeing what sticks. It was really tricky to encapsulate all the style elements I wanted to and still get a good likeness on this one. This is okay in parts, but I think I kind of missed it in other parts. I also made the head way too narrow, but I'm going to widen that out a little bit in the finished product. Oftentimes for the hair, it'll just be kind of blocked in, but not completely blocked in. So there's a lot of little empty spaces between lines, and it kind of looks pretty chaotic. For the colors, I'm just going to keep them super basic. In fact, I think I'm going to use a screen halftone print for this. So I just have a little halftone that I found online. I'm just going to place it around and then cut out parts of it, pretending it was like a traditional thing where you cut out the sheet of halftone and actually cut out of it with a little X-Acto knife and then just make your shadows like that. I'll also use just one color to break up the clothes from the skin tone, and that should be enough. The likeness is a bit off, but it definitely looks comic booky, and I think it definitely looks like Ashley Wood style. Here you can see the finished result, and once again I widened the face just a little bit so it looks a little better at least. I also added a chunk of color in the background because graphical, I don't know. Alright, let's try something a little more refined this time. I'm going to try to capture the style of Alphonse Mukha. Even if you don't recognize the name, I'm sure you've seen his art before. It's very classical, lots of girls. In fact, I'm not actually sure he's ever drawn men. But anyway, lots of girls with very flowing and graphical style hair and very simple skin tones. But anyway, we'll get to that in a little bit. First up, we gotta make our lines. So when it comes to Mukha's art, the lines are actually very important because usually the lines are in the finished work. You see all the line work and they're very important to the painting. So I want to be extra thoughtful with my lines. I also tried to go for a pose that feels very casual because that seems to fit his style. Now this style by far requires the most realistic proportions of any of the styles. So I really tried to make this look as realistic as possible while still keeping it a little bit flowy. It's very minimal in the amount of lines it decides to show, so you gotta be very careful and not get bogged down in trying to draw too much. That is, until you come to the hair, which is really where you get all your creativity out. For Mukha hair, it just needs to flow and swirl almost wildly, but you never want those lines to cross each other, so it's kind of like doodling, just making lines that kind of flow in unique ways without crossing each other. And then when you get to the edges, where things might be a little more crazy, you can really bring in a lot of elliptical shapes and let them flow into each other. The hair is really where the heart of this style is. It's a lot of fun to draw the hair. If it wasn't for the hair, there'd be no point in doing this style. Anyway, let's just move on to colors real fast. So for the skin tones, they're actually pretty interesting because all he does is a basic skin tone that looks very airbrushed. There's almost no definition of forms. Everything's just kind of vaguely cloudy and next to each other. I actually emphasize the forms and planes a little bit more than I should have. In general, for a Mukha painting, it would just be a lot of cloudy, nebulous skin tones with shadows going on, but not really following the form that closely. It's extremely easy to do, so you can try it out sometime, even if you're not comfortable with painting. Everything just falls back on the quality of the lines. Once again, though, the hair gets to be the star of the show. So we started with some very dynamic lines, and now we get to add some dynamic colors to the hair as well. So you really want to make sure there's a bunch of colors. Warm tones, cool tones, a little bit of a mix of everything. I'm pretty subdued and I didn't go as crazy as I could, but there's definitely room for craziness in there. Overall, I'm pretty satisfied with how the hair came out. You can see here the finished results, and of course I threw on a little Mukha background just to make it extra cohesive. And finally, this leads us to our last style of the day, style number 10. And for this one, I chose a very fun and interesting one, possibly the most fun and challenging one of all of them. This is going to be a self-portrait in the style of Tansy We, aka Kudaman. Anyway, Tansy We is an amazing artist who does really strong graphical shapes for everything. Lots of triangles, lots of just crazy dynamicism. He's one of my favorite artists to look at currently, so I'm gonna have a lot of fun trying to make this as close to his style as I can. I don't really even know where to begin, so I'm just gonna try to draw things out and just go crazy with shapes. One thing he often does do in his style is make the nose and mouth actually higher up on the face than the eyes, which sounds crazy, and you're probably wondering, how can you even do that? Well, just go look at his art. It kind of works out. It's a little bit weird at times. I don't know if I can go that extreme because I don't have the chops to pull it off confidently, but I'll try to make the nose and mouth pretty high up on the face. So I spent a lot of time looking at this and adjusting my drawing until I realized, since this is focusing on shapes, why don't I just cut out the line part and focus on those shapes by doing big chunks of color silhouette. I instantly liked this technique a lot more than my previous attempt. I did carry through with some of the things I had done before, such as the shape of the head and the ears and everything, but just focusing on these shapes really let me explore things to the next degree. As I moved into painting, I realized I had made the eyes maybe too big in my initial drawings, so I tried to shrink them down, really make them emphasize the shape of the face. The chin is up so high, there's so much room on the bottom of the face. I just love it. It looks so much fun. I made sure to capture that goofy expression where my front teeth are showing because that seems like my most accurate neutral pose. And I think it works in this style. Once I was relatively happy with where the painting was going, and I kept it pretty simple at that point, it was time to really go in there and start adding chunks of triangles and colors everywhere. So in hindsight, I think I went completely overboard with the amount of triangles and different values and colors I threw in. He's a little more subdued than I was, but I was just having too much fun trying to make all these triangles fit together. Anyway, aside from everything just being sharp and angular, there's a couple fun things to point out. The eyes generally have that oblong pupil in them, and the eyebrows and different hair things all have this three-dimensional form to them. So normally, you would probably think of eyebrows as just something superficial, cosmetic, but here, the eyebrows are actually these three-dimensional forms that kind of stick out from the face, which makes them pretty fun to draw as well. Alright, well, to be honest, this one actually came out better than than I was expecting, and I actually really like it. So I think this is actually my favorite one of the whole bunch. So I'm glad I saved the best for last, and I'm curious to know which one is your guys' favorite. But for me, this last one is definitely the highlight of Self-Portrait Day 2017. So once again, make sure to do your self-portraits. I hope you enjoyed this video. Even if you're just a casual viewer, I hope it was fun to watch. I know most of the style challenges on YouTube just have funny music playing over them, but I think it's more fun to talk and share my observations with you guys. Anyway, that's gonna do it for this video. I think we made the best style challenge on YouTube. So thank you all for watching, and once again, a huge big thank you to all of my patrons for making these videos possible. You guys are amazing. Okay, see you everyone.